Hello and welcome to our discussion today. Today we are looking at business markets and then the buyer behavior. So business markets and buyer behavior. Last week we looked at the consumer markets and the consumer buying behavior. Today we are focusing on business markets, right? And at the end of this lecture, we should be able to differentiate between business markets and then consumer markets. We'll also be able to identify characteristics of business markets, describe the types of business buying situations, examine the model of business buyer behavior, describe the stages of the business buying process, and then finally we'll examine the factors which influence the business buyer behavior. Okay. So, like we said last week, consumer markets are made up of individuals or households who purchase goods and services for personal use. And their decisions are mostly driven by personal needs, by preferences, by individual preferences, and then some other emotional factors. Okay. We also discussed that consumer markets involve smaller purchase volumes. However, you realize that there are a large number of buyers. So with consumer markets, even though the purchase volumes are small, you have a large number of buyers. Okay, and most of the things that are found, or some of the goods you can get in consumer markets, with consumer markets, you have groceries, you have clothing, and then entertainment. Okay, so these are some goods and services that consumer markets go for. Business markets, on the other hand, are made up of organizations, right? And these organizations make purchases, or they buy goods and services for production, for resale, or for operational needs. So what this means is that if a business organization is making a purchase, it's because maybe they are purchasing raw materials that will help them to process their final product, or they are purchasing some items that they will also sell to the consumer market, or they need those items they are purchasing to ensure that their operations run smoothly. So maybe they are purchasing a machine part, an equipment part, or some consumables for their operations. Okay. So with business markets, you notice that decisions are rational and often driven by cost, efficiency, and quality considerations. Unlike the consumer markets where you have a large number of buyers, for business markets, you have fewer buyers but larger purchase volumes per transaction. So for business markets, for every transaction, there's likely to be a very large purchase volume, unlike the consumer market where the purchase volumes are smaller, all right, and then you have more buyers. Business markets have fewer buyers and larger purchase volumes per transaction. So some examples we can see here are machinery, you have raw materials, and office supplies. Okay, so now we look at the characteristics of business markets. We have seen a few of them. Business markets are few, but they have larger buyers. Okay, so the number of buyers are not many, but the purchases per transaction are large. So you have higher or a larger transaction volume, and then a fewer or smaller buyer base. There's also what you call the derived demand. A derived demand here means that with the business markets, their demand is derived from the consumer demand for their end product. So, for example, if an organization is into the manufacture of chocolate, right, and the raw material is cocoa, you notice that the amount of cocoa that the business organization will purchase from a farmer depends on the demand of chocolate on the market from the consumer. Okay, so we say that with business markets, there's derived demand. The third characteristic is that there's a very complex buying process as compared to the consumer markets. Business markets have complex buying process, and sometimes it involves multiple stakeholders. The decision-making cycle is longer, and there are also formal processes to follow, unlike the consumer market. There's also a close supplier-customer relationship. What this means is that there is frequent collaboration to ensure that the product specifications and delivery schedules are strictly abided with. Okay, so if let's say you have promised to deliver some quality of product, then at a particular time, maybe you've promised to deliver in 3 days. What it means is that the business organization or procurement personnel within that business organization will be collaborating with the supplier. So the customer, which is the business organization, and the supplier would have a close relationship that will ensure that the order is exact, or they receive just what they ordered for. All right. Then there's also geographically concentration of buyers. What this means is that for most business markets, you have them sometimes concentrated at a particular region or at a particular place. Okay, so for example, if we pick Circle, there are a lot of markets that there are a lot of organizations that are around that place. If we pick the industrial area, right, you know that there are some group of companies that are found there. So for most industries, you realize that there are specific places or there are specific regions or zones where you are likely to find them. Okay, so the characteristics we looked at here are the fact that there are fewer but larger buyers. You have derived demand. There's a complex buying process. You have a close supplier-customer relationship, and then geographically concentrated buyers. For business organizations, there are various situations that will warrant a purchase. Okay, there are various situations for which an organization may have to make a purchase. The first situation is the straight rebuy, and this is a routine purchase of products with little or no specifications. So for example, we are buying, or the business organization is buying A4 sheets, right? Or they are buying pens or pencils or markers. Okay, all of those are routine purchases that the organization will make based on what they do within the organization. All right, so this does not require any special modification. It does not change. If we are buying A4 sheets are A4 sheets, and that's it, right? So that is the straight rebuy, and they are mostly for routine purchase of products. So maybe every month we buy some number of A4 sheets. Every month we buy some number of detergents. Of course, if you have washrooms, you are going to clean the place. So those are office supplies, and mostly these purchases are for restocking. Okay. Then you have the modified rebuy. The modified rebuy is where a buyer re-evaluates product specifications, prices, or suppliers for an existing need, sorry. So an example is where you have to update a software license with new features. So for example, you have been with one software company for a while, but now you want to upgrade maybe your storage, or you want to add on some specific features to what you already have. It will require that you re-evaluate what you already have with that organization and specify the new requirements so that that organization can fulfill the order successfully to meet your need. Okay. Then there's also the new task. The new task situation is mostly a first-time purchase, which requires extensive research and decision making. So, for example, an organization wants to purchase a manufacturing equipment. It is a new thing, it's a first time purchase, and maybe that equipment is such that you'd have to invest a lot of money, and so it's necessary that that organization performs the necessary research, okay, a very extensive research, and then takes time in the decision-making process to ensure that what they are getting is really what will meet their need. Okay, so there are three types of buying situations that every organization may find itself in is the straight rebuy, the modified rebuy, and then the new task. The straight rebuy is where there's a routine, so you don't have to change anything. They already know what they have to supply to you as an organization. Then the modified rebuy is where you may have to reevaluate the specifications of the product so that the supplier will be able to meet your need as a business. And then you have the new task, okay, which is a first-time purchase and requires extensive research and decision making. Okay. So what then is the model of the business buyer behavior? We are saying that for the business to make a purchase, there's a model, right? And the model involves an environment, the buying organization, and then the buyer's response. The environment is basically the market stimuli. So you have the product, the price, the promotion, and the place, as well as other factors. So you have the market stimuli as well as other environmental factors. We have discussed these already. So like economic factors, technological factors, political factors, and then cultural factors. Okay, so all of these within the environment will stimulate the purchase. So you have the marketing stimuli and then other environmental stimuli. Then there's the buying organization, which involves the structure and policies that will influence that organization's decision-making process. All right. And the buying organization will look at its internal factors. Okay, how the organization is structured, the policies with which it will take the decision, and then all of those internal factors that will influence the decision-making process is what you have here. And then finally, you notice that all of these is what will impact or that will influence that buyer's response. And this includes the selection of a product, the selection of a supplier, and then the order quantities that are involved. So this is what you have here, right? You have the environment, the buyer organization, and then the buyer response. So the environment, you have the marketing stimuli and other stimuli. And then based on what is happening within that organization, you have the influences and all of that, which will affect the buying decision of that organization. Then they will finally make a purchase of which product or service to go in for, which supplier to choose, the order quantity, that should be considered, the delivery terms and the time to deliver, okay, and how payment is supposed to be made. All right. So basically, this is a graphical view of what was discussed earlier. Now we look at the stages of the business buying process. And if you look at this, well, you notice that the stages in the business buying process is much longer than what we saw in the consumer buying process. Okay. So at the end of this lecture, you will have to do an evaluation, and let's see the differences or similarities between the consumer buying process and then the business buying process. Okay, so the business buying process first starts with a problem recognition. We saw this also in the consumer buying process. It starts with a problem recognition where the business identifies a need or a problem. Okay, so the identification of that need is what will warrant the purchase of the new equipment. Then there's the general need description. Once the need is identified, there's the need to define the nature and quantity of the product or service that is required to solve that need. All right, so there's a description of that need. And then there's also product specification, where the organization establishes precise technical criteria for the needed product. Okay, once this is done, then the supplier search begins. The supplier search has to do with identifying potential suppliers, okay, through maybe catalogs. You can check online, you can maybe have referrals from other companies you have been working with. But basically, the search is for suppliers who can give you the exact product you are looking for. The fifth step is proposal solicitation, where the business requests for bids or proposals from selected suppliers. All right. So once the proposal solicitation is done, the next step is supplier selection. The supplier selection involves evaluating proposals based on the price, the quality, the delivery, and then the reputation of that supplier. Okay. So from the supplier selection, you have order routine specification, where you finalize the order details, or you finalize on the terms of your purchase, the delivery times, and then specifications, as well as how payment will be made. And then finally, you have your performance review, where the business assesses the supplier's performance after the purchase has been made. Okay, and this is where, if the business entity is satisfied with the supplier, they are going to maintain their relationship and keep buying from that supplier. On the other hand, if expectations are not met and the satisfaction of the buyer is not very good, what happens is the relationship may be terminated. Okay. So basically, these are the stages of the business buying process. It starts with a problem recognition, the general need description, product specification, supplier search, proposal solicitation, supplier selection, order routine specification, and then the performance review. Okay, so this is what you have here in a diagram: the problem recognition, the general need description, product specification, the supplier search, proposal solicitation, supplier selection, order routine specification, and then the performance review. Okay. So in a business buying process, we want to look at those involved or participants involved in the business buying process. For businesses, we have what you call the buying center. The buying center is the decision-making unit of every business organization. So if you hear the buying center, that is where decisions about purchases are made. And it includes the users, you have influencers, buyers, deciders, and gatekeepers. Okay, so if we say users, users are members of the buying center who will use the product or the service. So most of the times, these buyers are those who initiate the buying proposal and describe the required specifications of the product or the service that they need. Okay. So once these users make or they initiate the process, then you have the influencers who define the product specifications and evaluate the alternatives, right? You also have buyers. The buyers are those who have formal buying authority to select suppliers and arrange for the terms of the purchase. Okay, so you have the buyers. Then the deciders. Deciders are those who select among the suppliers, right? Who should supply. So for example, if the business has about 3 suppliers for a particular product, the deciders are those who determine the actual supplier to deliver whatever product is needed or whatever service is needed. Okay, so where you have routine purchases which do not require any special characteristics for the product or the service, you can have the buyers also doubling up as the deciders. Okay, and then finally you have gatekeepers who control the flow of information to others. So here we can consider the secretaries, the technical personnel. They act as middlemen to ensure that information is given out to the right people. For example, phone calls, emails, text messages, and all of that. So the gatekeepers control the flow of information to others. Okay, so the participants in the business buying process are the users. You have influencers, buyers, deciders, and then gatekeepers. So we look at now the factors that influence the buying behavior of businesses, or factors that influence the business buyer, or factors that influence the business buyer behavior, right? The first one, we look at environmental factors. We have discussed the external environment, internal environment, and all of those already. So if I say environmental factors, we are looking at economic trends, right? We are looking at regulatory policies, technological advancements, and then cultural shifts. You also have organizational factors where you focus on how the organization is going about its operations, the company objectives, the policies, the procedures, and the purchasing strategies of that organization, right? You also have interpersonal factors where you look at how employees within the organization, we spoke about the buyers. Okay, we spoke about users, buyers, influencers, deciders, gatekeepers. All right. The relationship between those people can affect whether a purchase will be made by the business or not. Okay. So the interpersonal factors focus on relationships, influence, and conflict resolution among the buying center participants. Okay. Then we have individual factors. So just like we looked at these in the consumer buying behavior, it also happens here. So even for businesses, sometimes personal motivations, personal preferences, and perceptions also play a major role in whether the business will make the purchase or not. Okay, so personal motivations, preferences, and perceptions of decision makers also influence the business buyer behavior. All right, so these have been stated here. You have environmental factors, organizational factors, interpersonal factors, and then individual factors, which all affect whether or not the buyer will make a purchase. And this time it is a business buyer. So these are the factors that affect the business buyer behavior. Okay. Then, apart from businesses, there are also some institutions who make purchases like business. So you have institutional markets and then government markets. All right. So we have looked at business markets generally. But aside the business markets, you have institutional markets and then government markets. So some examples of institutional markets are schools, nursing homes, you have prisons, hospitals, as well as other institutions. And how they come in here is to provide goods and services to people in their care, right? So institutions vary from one another in their sponsors and objectives. So if we pick a hospital, the hospital may not operate the same way as a school. But you'll notice that if a hospital makes a purchase, it is to ensure that the patients are taken care of, or it is that purchase from the hospital is for the use of its patients. Okay. In the same way, if a school makes a purchase, it's for the use of the students in that school. And you'll notice that the buying needs of the hospital will be different from the buying needs of the school, right? So basically, those are the institutional markets. Then you have government markets. Government markets offer big opportunities to many companies, regardless of their size. Mostly the government markets, they give out the contracts, all right, for some of the major government projects that we see around us. Okay, and what is done is that they usually invite bids and award the contract mostly to the lowest bidder. And they prioritize domestic supplies over international supplies in some cases, of course. In some other cases, depending on the scope of the work to be done, some international suppliers are considered. All right. And one thing to note with government markets is that because the taxpayer is the one who is funding every government project, in fact, most of the government projects are funded by the taxes we pay, government spending is carefully watched by stakeholders. All right. Stakeholders check to see if spending is happening like it has to be. All right. So basically, this is all about the business buyer behavior. Our activity, or what we have to do, our assignment, is to examine the similarities and differences between business and consumer markets. Okay. And then I want you to also analyze which stage of the business buying process is most critical. All right. I want you to assess it, and then you let me know which of the stages you think is most critical. And then the final one, you want to tell us how interpersonal and organizational factors influence business buying behavior, right? So you would give me your responses to these when we meet in class. Thank you all very much, and we'll meet. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.